Hello, boys and girls. This is Mr. So again. Welcome back for another lesson of biology. Today we are going through lesson 8 about genetics of the inheritance. Before you start the video, remember to like and subscribe my channel and also share your video to your classmate and remind them to do their revision at home. Alright, let's start. On lesson 7, we talk about the theory of one gene, one protein. That one gene is able to make and produce one protein, and the protein will affects and shows our body trait or body characteristics. How? So in order to know that, we have to take a look at the basic genetics inheritance. Let's start with some basic history in the early 19th century. At that time, many biologists they believe in the blending theory, such as if you have such as a parent of blue flower and a parent of another yellow flower, after they reproduce, they have pollination. What flower will be given out? They will get the green flower. The idea of blending theory is that for the blue flower, after mating and reproduce with a yellow flower, it will give a green flower, and it is just like mixing color. This green flower, it cannot reproduce next time and then give back the blue color or yellow color flower. So it is just like mixing color. It cannot separate afterwards. Because of the problem of blending theory, so some scientists they think that there might be an other idea of how genetics works. Here is a scientist called Mendel. He lives in the church and he has so many brilliant ideas, so he tried to start to do some breeding experiment with plants. He used garden plants and then checked their change in characteristics in different generations. Mendel he first looked at the single characteristics, that is, the height of the plant, either if it is tall or short. Mendel he tried to do the experiment with a tall plant, and then tried to do the reproduction with a short plant. So if he used the idea of blending theory, what will be the possible offspring or next generation looks like? Tall and short goes together. They should get a middle height. This is a possible guess, right? However, to his surprise, all the plants for the first generation after the tall and short plant, they do the reproduction. All the first generation, they are tall, but not middle in the height. Mendel, he is a scientist, so therefore he tries to do other experiments to look for other characteristics. So he tried the flower color, the flower position, seed color, seed shape, etc., etc., etc. And what he found is that after the reproduction, only one character has been shown, but not a character in between the two parents. So now he concludes that for the blending theory, it is not applicable. This is not a very exact theory to explain genetics. So Mendel now he tries to take the first generation tall plants and then he tries to do a self-pollination and fertilization and see what will happen to the next second generation. To his surprise, after the reproduction for the second generation, he finds that there are actually tall plants and short plants as well. But there is actually a ratio. For the tall plants, he actually sees 3:1 ratios, like this. So now Mendel he concluded that the blending theory this is totally not working. And also the short character showed it up after skipping generation. He shows that 隔代遺傳, and these proves that blending theory is totally not explaining the genetics. So he tries to find another method to explain genetics. As a scientist, Mendel repeated the experiment by looking at a single character. So we call this an example of mono, single. Hybrid, that means cross over and reproduce, cross. What he found is that for the first generation, if they do self-pollination and reproduction, what happens? The second generation, they will all show an interesting number of 3 to 1 approximately. Mendel therefore concluded that this 3 to 1 ratio, it is not a coincidence, 唔應該係巧合啦。There must be a factor that helps inheritance， 有啲因子咧喺背後咧幫佢做遺傳啦。And the characteristics or the trait of a person or an organism is carried by the factors. And these factors remained unchanged during reproduction, but it does not blend like the fluids. So Mendel, he tries to think in this way. For the plant, this is the first generation. It looks tall, and it must have half the genetic factor coming from the tall parent, and it must have another half of the genetic factor coming from the short parent. And now, for this first generation, how does it look like? It is tall. For the tall plant now, it has a tall genetic factor. And at the same time, it has a short genetic factor altogether, but it only shows the tall trait. So that means Mendel, he proposed that for the genetic factor tall, for the tall factor, it must have a stronger power to express its tall characteristics than the short factor. I'm just trying to show you a picture so you can get an easy understanding. Here is the tall factor. It is a lot more powerful than the short factor. So since the tall factor is very powerful to express, so therefore you'll be able to see the tall characteristics. Given that big T, it means tall factor, it gives the tall characteristics. Now, for these plants in here, this is the first generation. Now it has a big T, that means tall factor, and then a small t, a short factor, and it still looks like overall tall. If you try to mate or reproduce this first generation here with another first generation, what offspring will be shown? In order to do that, let's try to do some simple mathematics table. For the first generation, the parent, it has a big T, that means a tall factor. And then it also have a small t, a short factor in it. And then for another parent that he's going to mate with, or he tried to self-pollinate itself, try to reproduce it with itself, so it will also have a tall factor. And then a small t short factor. So after the reproduction, they will have a random matching of the big T and small t, tall and short factor. So let's do the box, fill it in. What will be formed? What are the possible offspring that you will get after reproduction? So it should be in here, should be big T. And then for the another box here, it should be big T, small t, big T, small t, small t, small t. And after that, let's write down also the characteristics of the offspring. If you have both big T factor, that means total factor, how does the offspring looks like? It should looks like tall. Next, if you have a big T, small t, tall and short factor, how does your offspring looks like? It should still looks like tall because the tall factor has a stronger power to express. So as the part in here. Now the last part is, what about the small t, short factor? If they goes together, Mendel finds out that they looks short. Concluding what you got from the last slide, then you will know one of the plan is to get both big T, tall factor. And then you have another plant with big T, tall and short factor. Still looks tall. Another one also big T and small t, tall and short factor, and still looks tall. And the final one, both small t, short factor, so it looks very short. That's why after the generation, you will be able to see a 3:1 ratio for the tall to short. Scientists later on they decided to use some shorter and easier terms to describe genetics. Instead of using the organisms has a genetic factor tall, genetic factor short, they decided to use one single word to describe it. We call it alleles. The organisms has tall alleles and a short allele, etc. And then when you have a stronger power to express, we will call this allele a dominant allele. Dominant allele. We use a capital letter, usually maybe big T this time. And then if it has less power to express, we call it a recessive allele. We use a small letter. And for the organisms, if they have the same allele in the body, such as big T, or small t, we call this homozygote. Zygote, that means fertilized egg. Homo, that means same. 同一款嘅 same zygote, that means homozygote. We may also call this purebred Chinese 纯種. And if the organisms, they have different alleles in their body, such as big T and small t, we call this heterozygote. Hetero, that means 不同嘅 allele, different allele. For the characteristics, we call them in genetics phenotype. And then for the genetic makeup in genetics, we call it genotype. Such as, we will call it, what is the genetic makeup of the tall plants? You can say, tall plant, the genotype is big T, or big T, small t, like this. For the short plant, the genetic makeup, the genotype would be small t. Or some people will use the words to describe the genotype. For example, big T, they are going to describe them as homozygous dominant, same dominant. It shows the tall character. Or if it is the short plant, small t, we call the homozygous recessive. It shows the recessive character, the short character. And for the big T and small t, they have different alleles. We call it heterozygotes as the genotype. Alright, I'm going to stop here right now. Please, after watching the video, take a rest and then go to lesson 9 and look for the examples and exercise for the inheritance part 2. Alright, so see you next time. Bye bye.